Oh, right, what a day. Bought wife's birthday present. New clothes for baby. Bought meat. Bought dog biscuits. Called Uncle Igor. There was something else I needed to do before I took rugs out. Can you remember? What about you? It was something important I needed to remember. Oh no. Whoa. What's with all this melodrama? You'll be upsetting people. You talking to yourself? Anyway, where were we? Now that I'm no longer fit to go outside, it's a good job I've got some good old-fashioned indoor hobbies to be getting on with. Cue credits. Hello and welcome to Blide Back Hobbies, a channel dedicated to the love of all things miniature, whether that's painting, building, crafting, kitbashing and or dioramas. At the centre of it all will be the miniatures themselves. I've decided to start with Warhammer 40k, specifically these guys, the Space Marines. Call them that, call them Adeptus Astartes, call them whatever you want. And if they're good enough for Henry Cavill, then they're good enough for us. Knights in armour, set in space against a quasi-gothic backdrop, fighting a war that will seemingly never end. Now as you can see, there are plenty of different varieties of Space Marine to choose from. Being that it's a full moon, and that we're trapped in Yorkshire, a place so spooky that Dracula decided to land in Whitby for his holidays, we're going to stick with the theme of dark and gothic. I can't think of any chapter more dark or gothic than everybody's favourite space vampires. No, you great Burke, the Blood Angels. Now I've dipped my toes in and out of the Warhammer universe since probably the late 80s, starting with miniatures, then things like Space Crusade, the original release of Rogue Trader. The first iteration of Warhammer 40k had heavy influences from 2000 AD and in particular Judge Dredd. The more modern style is known as Grimdark, which is a bleak world where every day is Halloween without the fun. Nobody gets sweets. All you get is a large stick and a box of matches to get you through the basic training, where the passing criteria is running away from the local monstrosities and beating whoever keeps up with your back with said stick. And when all's done, you can create a large pyre from your fallen comrades and use your matches to cook and eat the edible bits. Still, enough about Barnsley, back to 40k. White Dwarf magazine came out every month. I have a lot of fond memories of that. That had a sort of gritty punk aesthetic that was raw, chaotic, a lot of bright colours, a little bit over the top. Then through to the late 90s it evolved a gothic look. The old style miniatures were hand sculpted and then mass produced. I have a lot of nostalgia for the old sculpts. They look a little bit stubby limbed and less realistically proportioned than modern miniatures. Still love them, still great, but it's been a long time since I've actually bought any Warhammer 40k, so what I need to do is buy myself a kit. So let's have a look and see what we can find.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
I usually buy most of my miniatures second hand. A little bit naughty if I'm honest. You should always try and support your local game shop because it keeps all those troglodytes off the street and stops us from alienating pensioners, children and other similar normal folk. I bought this brand new this time and we don't do things by halves, so I've ended up a kidney short and a box set up. These are the new Primaris Space Marines, which are true scale. These look great. Right, so we've got some assault troops here and a captain. There's a nice variety of different miniatures there, and then I remember these guys at the back. Hang on a minute, there's something not quite right about them. Oh my god.
Stop! Yes,
Didn't these used to look better than this? It's not just me, is it? I mean, what do you think of them? What about you?
It will not do.
There's now for it. I'm just going to have to fix them. Now, Games Workshop have made some excellent models over the years, but in my opinion, this isn't one of them. When I see this, I think less Avenging Angel and more this. But then again, maybe that's what they were going for. Right, I'll just channel my internet spirit animal. Let's see now. Marines, Gothic, Golden, Angel. No, stay focused. Perfect. As you can see, I've used some magic cream to get my hands back to a decent dexterous state. I'm looking through some of the models that I have to find a more suitable armour. I've decided to use the Stormcast Eternals, Games Workshop miniatures from the Age of Sigmar fantasy range. They're a similar size to the Marines and the style looks almost perfect for what we're trying to achieve. After sifting through several different options, I've settled on two main bodies. I like the shape of the armour and the cloaks that they had. I also thought that they'd go together nicely with some old parts from a Blood Angels kit that I had lying around. I think these will all do nicely. Let's start putting them together. One of the bodies needed paint stripping, so I've soaked it in isopropyl alcohol for about 30 minutes and then scrubbed it with an old toothbrush, and that brought everything up nice and clean, and we're ready to put that together. And at this stage, I'm just picking up parts, seeing what fits and seeing what I think will look nice. I am planning on altering the shoulder pads and putting on the real Space Marine pauldrons because they've got that nice domed effect. The old kit that I'm using, I've actually got the embossed Blood Angels logo on there, so that'll look pretty nice, I think. And I've also got quite a few bits and bobs from the new kit that I've bought and the old one that have got a lot of chapter specific Blood Angels logos and things like that, so we'll add a little bit of flair to them and see what we can put together and give it that signature Blood Angels look. I wanted a real authentic angel looking wing, and I bought these from a shop on eBay called DK Miniatures. They're really nice prints and I'm very happy with them. I suggest you go and check out his store. This pack actually came with 3 sets, so what I'm doing at the minute is I'm just blue tacking them on the back to have a look and see which sets I think are nicest on each miniature. Then we'll mix and match and see what fits. The keen-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I've decided to make one of my Marines a beaky, which is the one, funnily enough, with the pointy nose. And before any of you jump on the comments immediately screaming that's not law specific or that never happened, I would just like to say I don't care. These are my toy soldiers and I'll do what I like with them.
Breaking the lore, breaking the lore.
I tried out 3 different sorts of backpacks, the ones that came with the wings, the ones that are in the new box, and I finally decided to settle on the original ones as I thought they looked a little bit more in proportion and didn't take anything away from the wings. So then I'm just attaching them using a combination of super glue, modelling putty, and then a little bit of liquid green stuff. Just put them with a brush to fill in some of the gaps. Okay, so we're just about there. I'm just filling in a gap on this leg on one particular model. This is an unfortunate side effect of some of the push fit models. They don't always go together as flush as they are designed to. But then again, to be fair, I am messing with the model and changing bits, so it's going to put a little bit of pressure on the joints. But we'll patch this guy up and then we're just about there. We'll get the air dryer on there to speed up the drying process, and on we go. So it's time to airbrush the miniatures now so that we can get them undercoated. I'm going to do a form of Zenithal highlight today. Now most people do a Zenithal highlight in a mixture of blacks, greys and whites, and although this is an extremely good technique and I am a fan of it, I'm more of a fan of multicoloured Zenithal highlights. I feel that they sometimes create a more realistic shadow tone. Very rarely are shadows actually black. They're usually a mixture of whatever colours are in the light and the objects themselves. So we're going to be undercoating in the dark brown. The next layer at a slight angle, catching the light but still hitting most of the miniature from above in an olive green, and then ever so slightly more offset with a beige, and then finally an off-white just to have that top catching the light zenith at the peak. So I'll just turn these around a little for you so you can see what I mean by the highlights at the top and the different colour tones that are underneath. Should give it a nice sort of warm earthy tone and should be a good base for that gold. There should be some interesting colours on the wings. It's a good start, I'm quite happy with this. Now it's time to build the bases, and just as I did with the miniatures, I'm basically picking up all the different bits and bats that I've got in my basing bric-a-brac box. The brown matter.
Where's it coming from?
You can see on top of those bases are dried pieces of bark that are from the garden. Dried them out and picked up some nice big pieces, and these usually work nicely for pieces of rock. I've got a few sort of pre-made jewels and rocks and everything like that. Just going to stick everything together and see what I can come up with and if I can get some nice shapes. Then I'll probably fill out what I need to in between with modelling putty, green stuff, and possibly even a little bit of air drying clay. I decided that the model here holding the blood goblet was going to be the main guy. Since he's already got one knee raised, might look quite nice with a dynamic pose. So either just landing, possibly just taking off from a small rock formation. So I thought I'd build one and see how it looked. After various bits of remodelling and repositioning, I finally decided on a configuration that I quite liked, and I just added a little bit of texture on with one of the rollers to give it a little bit more of a natural look. Moving on to the next phase. I sealed the base with PVA glue all over, ready for priming, and then moved on to affixing my beaky marine on top of his piece of rock. Find a position that I liked, ready for doing the same. I put a pin in the bottom of the raised foot of the marine with the goblet so I can affix into the rock a little bit easier and drill the hole into the top of that rock, but it wasn't quite contacting the way that I wanted to, so I used a little bit of green stuff just to raise that area a tiny bit and make it look a little bit more natural and not that he's balancing on his tippy toes. It's now time to prime the bases, and we're priming them in exactly the same way as we primed the miniatures, the same combination of paints and the same Zenithal highlight from that same angle. After a quick double check to make sure that everybody still fits on top, I'm ready to start painting the bases. We're going to start with a very thinned down the Army Paint the Speed paint, and this is a dark grey, just to fill out that rock crevice details all over the bases, and then we'll add a few bits and bobs afterwards. You may have noticed earlier in the video I was using a laser pen to test out a few fluorescent jewels that I had in different colours. I decided to go for the pinky red one, being that these are blood angels, and I thought that the colour glowed a little bit more nicely. So I've added these with just a little bit of super glue, and I'm currently dry brushing the raised areas on the rocks to add a tiny bit more detail. Finally, I'm just sprucing up the bases with a few different colours of flock and some artificial flowers, just to add a little bit of colour, before painting the rims with a nice brown, and then the bases are done. Now we're on to the meat and potatoes of it all. We're starting with the gold, as it's going to be the main colour on both the miniatures, and what we're actually going to do with this is start with a deep bronze followed by a stippled highlight, which is where you just basically sort of tease it all over in tiny little patches to give a sort of mottled effect, but you work up very slowly in little layers until you've got a more clean coverage over the miniature. So as I said, we're going to start with a nice bronze, and then we're going to highlight up to a mid-range gold, and then finally a nice shining bright gold on the top of that one. After the first layer of bronze, I'm using a Reichland flesh tone wash just into the recesses to add a little bit more depth before adding that first stippled gold layer, and we'll do that on both miniatures. Just as a note, I usually thin my paints because of the fact that we're using a Zenithal highlight. It usually turns out a better result when you do what's commonly known as glazing, which is a fancy way of saying thinning down your paints and doing several thin layers as opposed to one thick one, which is usually good practice anyway. And I, generally speaking, thin down my paints with a little bit of either Army Painter Quick Shade medium or Vallejo Glaze medium, and a few drops of water as well. Here I thought I'd treat you to a second angle, and we're just watching the Reichland flesh shade going into those recesses nicely. Should give it a lot of nice depth. I'm just about to start stippling on that first gold layer now, and as you may be able to see as it develops, just tiny little almost dotted brushstroke marks. I am breaking a little bit of a rule here. Every now and then you may notice that I am gripping my miniature. Even if I'm doing it gently, it's still not best practice. Nowadays you can get one of those nice fancy overhead grips for your miniatures, but we haven't had any new technology in Yorkshire since the steam-driven pumping engine, so I like to stick to bits of blue-tack wood and plastic. Every now and then I will grip my miniature, but I assure you, being very gentle with it. If you're enjoying this video, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to please like and subscribe and hit that notification button. It would be extremely helpful. This is a brand new channel. I would like to try and grow it, so any help would be greatly appreciated. And if you could also share the channel with your friends and family, that would be superb as well. Thank you very much. Making a start on the red details. What we're going to do to start with is pick out all the individual little jewels and patches of embossed wings and things like that, all the little red details that we want. And we're going to paint them pure white and then go over them with a Blood Angels red contrast paint. Finally, what we'll do later on is cover them with a little bit of a red glaze just to give it some depth, then some technical hard coat to make them shine and glisten, and then pick out a few raised highlights with pure white just to make that little light glint at the end. But we'll see that much later on. This is a paint called Blood for the Blood God, and it stays sticky and gluey looking and fairly realistic when it comes to creating nice blood textures. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill the goblet and make it look like he's got blood overflowing from it. For the leather on the paint job, I actually started out by having a more traditional brown looking leather, and I changed my mind because it didn't contrast enough from the gold, so I decided to go for a nice sort of regal purple look, and I'll be layering that up in a similar way to what I did with the gold, starting from a dark, then a wash into the recesses, and then a second highlight followed by an edge highlight. It's important to note that it is okay to change your mind on your colour schemes even halfway through a paint job. There's nothing to stop you repainting certain parts of the model as long as you do it cleanly and carefully. I'm now going to paint some black areas on the models, the Beaky Marine's gun and the swords, and then what we're going to do is we're going to try some nice glistening light effects with some speciality paints on both swords. This is technical hard coat just to make the sword's surface appear shiny, and it also makes the next paint glisten a little better once it's applied. So we're using two different varieties of Vallejo shifter paints for the edges of the swords, which should give them a nice sort of interesting effect. They've got an iridescent quality to them, so they look different colours in different lights. And we're using an orange violet for the Beaky Marine, which actually comes out a nice sort of almost a pink when it's applied. And then for the Goblet Marine, we're using a red gold, which actually looks more of a greenish off yellow in most lights, and then has tints of red when you look at it in different angles. So they should come out nice. And then what we'll do is we'll use a pastel yellow to pick out the details on the Goblet Marine, and we'll use a pastel pink to pick out the details on the Beaky Marine, and then finally stipple a little bit of black back into the recesses in the middle of the sword to create a nice sort of lightning effect, and then finish off the tips with a pure white. For the wings, I decided to go for a little bit more of a colourful scheme rather than a pure white, and I decided to do several thinned down bluish glazes on the end wing tips and a sort of mottled beige motif on the ruffly bits. I have no idea, I'm not an expert on birds, I'm not an ornithologist in any way, shape, fashion or form. I just wanted to colour the wings. Not quite parrot, but not quite pure dove. So, as I said, several layers of thinned down Nighthaunt contrast paint, Seraphim Sepia, and then what we're going to do is we're going to dry brush this with pure white. I'm also going to go over it with a grey wash on the white areas, and then I'm going to pick out some details with a little bit of a light beige, then finally finish off with pure white just to pick out some details all along the edges, a little bit of extra attention. As previously mentioned, I'm now going to pick out all the little pieces of jewellery and anything that needs a little bit of extra shine on it with some technical hard coat. It really does give it that nice sort of jewellery, glassy look that's needed for something that's supposed to be precious rocks or shiny surfaces of any kind. Sometimes it's good just to make things look wet. I'm now adding a few thin down layers of pure white to the cloaks, just to make those raised edges pop a little bit better and give a better contrast between the shades that we created when we did multicoloured Zenithal highlight at the beginning when we... Finally, it's time for a tiny bit of red glaze, a few more finishing touches, and then we should be ready to glue these together. I'd like to thank each and every one of you who've stuck with me so far. This has been a fun first episode for me. I really look forward to doing more Warhammer in the future, although I will not be limiting myself to just Citadel miniatures. It's going to be a nice variety, I think. Should the channel grow, as I hope it will do, I will get you guys to vote on what to do as projects. We're going to be working more towards the direction of dioramas, I think, although I will be doing individual showcase models, a little bit like what we've done today from time to time. So, thank you very much once again, and let's have a look at the end results.